You wanted to talk about barbecue. You wanted to know my secrets to barbecue. Well, my secret is I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not that good at it, and it doesn't matter. It's still delicious. It's easy for me. It can be easy for you too. Hey, you, how's it going? How are you? It's AD Roundtree. Welcome to this, your Friday edition of the show. Yeah, Friday, my friend. Excellent job. You did it. You made it through yet another week, the first week of 2022. Your weekend is upon you, and you know what? You have earned this one. Because every single day you work so hard, you grind away, you give the best that you are for the people that matter the most. And not only that, you do so much that helps keep our little part of the world turning as well. And I want to say thank you to you for everything you do. If you need something, if you need to talk, if there's anything I can do for you to make your Friday better, hit me up. I'm here with you. I'm here for you. At ADSXE. It's where you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at ADSXE. Put it in your phone now in case you need it later. So I started this podcast after coming off your radio. I was on your radio for 17 years, and that came to an end about a month ago now. And, well, I was going through a very, very difficult patch. Still kind of am with my dad. It was more difficult then because I was in a foreign country. I was in Kosovo. I was in Macedonia looking after my father in hospital who had had a medical emergency. And it's interesting. A lot of people have asked me what the medical care is like over there. The medical care there is top notch. In fact, for those of you that listen in Houston, Texas, that used to listen to me on 94.5 The Buzz, the cardiologist that treated my father both in Kosovo and in Macedonia did a lot of his medical training in Houston at St. Luke's, I think. I think it was St. Luke's. It was either St. Luke's or Methodist. But anyways, he is incredibly accomplished, knows exactly what he's doing, and my father was receiving a very high level of care. I think the big difference, though, was that they were chronically understaffed. COVID had sort of strained their resources to breaking points, and in addition to that, there's just not as many people in the medical field over there. And, well, a lot of the time, the hospitals we were in were understaffed to the point where it became my job to kind of be there 18 or so hours a day. And my main function was helping the nurses get my father fed. Nutrition was an incredibly important part of his recovery, I was told. He needed to eat. He needed to put on some weight. He needed to get enough calories to sustain his body's function so he could heal, so he could get better from his various ailments. So it became my job to feed him 3 times a day, which was not always easy, not always fun, but something I managed to get done. And it did, I have to tell you, make me think of what so many of you have been bringing up, barbecue. In fact, Kimmy and Charla, in particular, we're asking about barbecue. I started this podcast to deal with the things that were on your mind, whatever it is you're going through. If you have something you're trying to learn, earn, achieve, accomplish, or become, some obstacle you're facing in life, if you have something that you feel is holding you down, holding you back, some sort of problem that you're facing, I figured this podcast would be a big part of the way we could get each other through. I'm not a shrink, I'm not a doctor, I'm in no way, shape, or form qualified to dispense advice, but I do know that talking things out makes them easier. So I figured we'd talk out whatever you wanted to talk out. As it turns out, many people wanted to talk out barbecue. And that actually didn't hit a nerve, but it was an emotional thing for me because I hadn't physically seen my father, been in his presence since before COVID happened. My father had lived in Kosovo for a while now. He moved there for work. He moved there to do legal work. That was his field of specialty, Eastern European law. He loved it there. But he was getting ready to come back to America. He wanted to spend more time with me and my sister and his beautiful granddaughter, my niece Ellie. And then COVID happened, and my dad has congestive heart failure and a host of other medical problems. And at the beginning of COVID, he was like, maybe I just come back now. And then he was like, apparently I'm at greater risk because of my age and because of my heart failure. And apparently we don't really know how things go when you travel at the moment. You could be stuck on planes in crowded places. And this was at the very beginning of everything when nobody really knew what was going on. So my dad made the decision to stay put. So I hadn't seen him physically in quite some time. We video chatted a lot. We messaged. We talked on the phone. We did all of those things, but I hadn't been around him. He hadn't come over to my place since I moved into this particular place. And during COVID, I taught myself how to barbecue. And I would send him pictures of the food I was working on. And he was like, okay, you got to smoke a ham. So I smoked a ham. My dad used to smoke a Christmas ham. That's what he did while we were growing up. And he sort of gave me some instructions. And I wound up smoking a Christmas ham. And I sent him pictures and he said, that looks great. And I can't wait to try some of this food that you're cooking. And, well, I haven't had a chance yet to share my newfound ability to cook and to barbecue with my father. So when people started asking about it, it made me think of that. And it was an emotional tug because there I was, cooking barbecue, wanting to share it with my family, not able to do it. Eventually I was able to do it with my mom and my sister when we first started getting back together again, and that was great. But I think one of the things that I really learned and picked up about barbecue and cooking and all of the above is the love that goes into it. I was excited to learn how to cook because I'd never been able to cook anything before. And then when I got to be okay at it, when I started to make some things that could taste good, I was like, it would be really great. And this was during the depths of COVID, before there were vaccines, before anyone really knew what was going on. This was in the middle of a lockdown. I started to be pretty good at some barbecue. I thought, gosh, all I want to do is to be able to gather my family together and cook for them. I've never been able to do that before, and I want to be able to share this with the people that I love and care about now. And it's kind of a bummer that I didn't get a chance to do it with my father. But I started posting a lot of stuff on social media. People picked up on it, and, it became a big part of what I did. And when I say I couldn't cook before, I genuinely could not cook before. Like, literally, here's how inept I was in the kitchen. I set a cup of tea on fire. Yes, I set a cup of tea on fire. How does one do this? I hear you ask. Well, it takes a special type of stupidity. But I was making tea in my apartment many years ago. And, I didn't have a kettle yet in this apartment. So I did what a lot of people do. I was making tea in the microwave. So I put the cup of tea in the microwave, turned it on to heat it up. And, a minute or so into the process, I see flames coming out of the cup of tea. I smell smoke. I'm like, oh my God, what the hell is going on? How is my cup of tea on fire? And then I took it out and realized I forgot to put the water in. So what I essentially did was set a bag of tea on fire. I dispensed of the burning tea bag and started over, this time complete with water. However, I smelled more smoke and realized that I hadn't fully put the tea bag out and it had set my garbage on fire. Basically, I nearly burned a home down trying to make a cup of tea. Fortunately, I did not, but that's how bad I was in the kitchen. So the idea of being able to cook at all was kind of an alien foreign concept to me. I wanted to be able to do it, especially when COVID happened and lockdown happened and, no one was going out to restaurants anymore and all of the above. I was like, I should learn how to cook a little something. And I've had a grill for years, but grilling to me was difficult. Sometimes things turned out great. Other times things turned out like an especially tough old leather shoe. My forays into grilling meat were haphazard at best. And so I didn't really have faith in my abilities. I'm like, some people can make a perfect steak and a perfect burger on the grill all the time. How do I do that? So I started experimenting. And this is how I got into barbecue. This is the great thing about barbecue. This is how barbecue became a passion of mine. Here's a secret that a lot of people don't realize. If you don't know how to cook, barbecue is a good place to start because, typically you're using cheaper cuts of meat. You're doing longer cooks, which means it's much more difficult to mess up. Yeah, it's true. And barbecue is kind of like pizza. even if you don't get it right, even if it's not that great, it's still smoked seasoned meat. Chances are it's going to taste pretty good. And so I realized this after I slow cooked some ribs. I was like, I'm going to try some ribs. And I looked up a recipe and it said, okay, here's what you do. You cook them slow and low. They were delicious. And then I realized barbecue is adding smoke to the whole process. So this is my secret to barbecuing. It's really simple. It is, oh my gosh, a world of expertise. I'm an enthusiastic novice. I've only barely scratched the surface, but I know that even entry-level barbecue, if you've never barbecued once in your life, chances are you can succeed in making something delicious. So here's how I do it. I get whatever meat is on sale. I get the cheapest cut because, like I said, I didn't want to screw things up. There had been too many times where I'd bought steaks and made a horrible mess of something that was kind of pricey. I didn't want to do that anymore. So you get a cheaper cut of meat. A pork shoulder is a great way to start out. Oftentimes it's called a pork butt, and it is the tough, sinewy piece of shoulder meat that, well, isn't that awesome unless you cook it for a really, really long time at low heat. Often this is what they make pulled pork out of. And here's the thing. It's very, very forgiving because you're cooking it for extended periods of time. All the tougher parts of it, like the fats and things of that nature, the more sinewy parts of the meat, the parts that aren't so tender, because you're slow cooking them, those kind of render out. And all of a sudden it becomes this delicious, tender piece of meat. And it's super easy. Buy a pork shoulder. They tend to be very cheap and they can feed an army. This is what you do. You don't need a smoker. You don't need anything other than a grill. You get yourself some wood chips. I tend to go hickory. Hickory really works on a variety of different things. It's hard to mess up with hickory. So, oftentimes with pork, you go apple or whatever, but hickory tends to be a good base in my experience. By the way, there's barbecue experts listening to this now cringing in disbelief, I think. And there's all sorts of ways you can do this. I started out with just a tinfoil pouch of hickory chips. And you've got your grill. You're going to have a hot side and a cold side to this grill. You are going to get those hickory chips smoking by putting them over the hot side of the grill, meaning half your burners are on, half are off if you're using gas, or if you're using a charcoal grill, you've got all the charcoal on one side, so all the heat's coming on one side. You are going to fill your tinfoil pouch with hickory chips, and a lot of people tell you to soak them. I did not, just because we're dealing with low heats. And, after leaving them over the hot part of the grill, they tend to start smoking. Now, you can get really fine hickory chips. You can get fatter hickory chips or wood chips of any description. You can get pellets. You can get whatever. And those all have slightly different methods to getting smoking, but I use reasonably fine hickory chips. So all I had to do was put them in a tinfoil pouch, put them in the grill over the hot side of the grill. And I got my grill very low in terms of its heat. Right around 225 to 250 is where I tend to do most of my best smoking. But yeah, you just take your tinfoil pouch of wood chips, you put them over the hot side of the grill. You get that grill up to about 225, and really what you're doing is making an oven out of it. You're making an oven and or a slow cooker out of it. And you're getting it up to 225 and starting to have some smoke come out of it. You don't need a lot, just a little bit. The thin blue line is what people look for. But you want some smoke coming out of your grill. And, well, before that, you will have gotten to grips with your piece of meat. In this case, we're going pork shoulder in my mind, just because pork shoulder is very cheap. It's very forgiving. It's hard to screw up. You can slice it into slices and make pork sandwiches out of it. You can have pork steaks that you make out of it, or you can shred it and have pulled pork with it if you mix it with some barbecue sauce. There's all these things you can do with it. It's hard to screw up. Now, one thing that's very important is you probably had your pork shoulder in the fridge. You want to let that come up to room temperature before you do anything with it. In theory, I like to have the night before seasoned this piece of meat. Again, we're going with pork shoulder. And that means you sort of get it out of its packaging, you drain it. And I've tried all sorts of different barbecue rubs, but what I've found works the best, most consistently, is equal parts salt, pepper, garlic. Now, a lot of people will go kosher salt. Here's the thing, that's a little chunky and it can be a bit uneven when you're doing that sort of stuff. So be aware that if you go kosher salt, that it's not going to mix in the same way with your rub as normal salt would. I've done both. Both have turned out good, but it's something you want to be aware of going in. I recommend starting with normal table salt, pepper, and garlic powder, all in equal amounts. Really don't be afraid to coat that pork shoulder in all of it. And then you stick it in the fridge overnight. You've got plenty of seasoning on the outside that you've rubbed in. You take it out the next day as you're getting your grill going. You've brought it up to room temperature. And then this is what you do. You put that on the cold side of the grill. Remember we said the grill is half warm, half cold. You're putting this piece of meat on the cold side of the grill and you are shutting it. You want to keep the temperature, like I said, around 225, 250. There's all sorts of people that barbecue a little bit hotter, but I go 225, 250. And you want to settle in for the long haul. It's going to take a while. This is a big part of the magic of barbecuing, though. Because you're cooking a forgiving piece of meat for so long, it's not like you have to time it perfectly. If you're making a steak, a little too long, not long enough, you go from medium rare to well done and you're annoyed because you didn't cook it the way you wanted to. You try and get that nice crust on the outside and you lose the medium rare on the inside. What did you just do? It's frustrating. It's difficult. And year 1 of COVID, I was learning how to smoke stuff. Year 2 of COVID, I was learning how to grill. It's a much quicker, more precise process. But smoking things, like I said, if you can't cook it all, you can make something delicious by smoking meat. You can get going on your entry-level barbecue and make something that's awesome for the whole family really, really fast. And like I said, this pork shoulder is a great place to start because it's forgiving and it's cheap. And so you've got your grill going at about 225. You have a cold side and a hot side. The wood chips are smoking on the hot side, and then that pork shoulder, which you've seasoned with equal parts salt, pepper, and garlic, that's on the cold side. And you just kind of wait. Depending on the size of the pork shoulder you went with, it could take an awfully long time. 7, 8 hours, whatever the case may be. And the longer it cooks, the more all the tougher, fattier parts of that meat have a chance to render and get tender and get delicious. So don't be afraid to start early in the morning if you're going for lunch or dinner. It's that easy. Now, there's going to be times where you have to refill the wood chips. There's going to be times where maybe your grill goes up or down in temperature, especially if you're outside and it's a hot day. But it's a relatively easy process. You're basically just popping this piece of pork on the cold side of the grill and babysitting it, checking on it every once in a while. I'm a little paranoid. I tended to check on it every half hour. I'd monitor the temperature of the grill. I wouldn't open it unless the grill had gotten too hot. But that's it. And then you want to check with a thermometer, a digital thermometer, one that you can stick in. You want to check at the biggest, fattest parts of the meat, because we're dealing with pork, that the internal temperature got up to 165. Now, if you go hotter than that, this is a great thing about it. If you go hotter than that, if you get the meat up to a higher temperature on something like a pork shoulder, it's not the end of the world. It's not all of a sudden you've overdone it and you've got this tough piece of meat. No, this is the beautiful thing about smoking things and slow cooking things and going slow and low that makes it that much more forgiving and that much easier to make something delicious. If it gets up to a higher heat, those fat and those tougher parts of the meat, they tend to render even more. So there's a lot of people that will advise you to get this thing well past 165. And you can make those decisions as you go. You can make those decisions as you try your first and second pork shoulder. I've discovered a couple different methods that I use to get things where I'm going. But this is the beautiful thing about barbecue. It's a lot more simple than I think a lot of people think it is. It's certainly more simple than I thought it was. And it's possible to make a huge, delicious piece of meat for not very much money that can feed a family. Now, at the end of this cook, this is what I tend to do. You've seasoned it with the salt, pepper, and garlic, but I like a nice crispy charred bark on the outside. You're going to get a good start to that bark on the outside just through the smoking process alone. But at the end, I like to get that, and if you're doing this in a smoker, well, if you're doing this in a smoker, you already know what you're doing, and you're probably disgusted with my lack of knowledge on this subject. But if you're doing that in a smoker, this isn't really an option. But if you're doing it on a grill, this is great, because what I like to do is baste it in butter super quick, take it out to rest while I get that grill super freaking hot as it'll go. And then I like to do what's called a reverse sear on this. So it's, cooked all the way through. It's basted with butter. I take it out to rest for a little bit. I get the grill ripping hot, and then I put it directly over the heat. So it crisps up and gives a really nice crunchy bark on the outside of this pork shoulder. And it is, trust me when I say this, scrumdiddlyumptious. It's fantastic. So that's it. That is my secret to barbecuing. That is much easier than you think it is. By the way, after you get it out, you need to tent it, which means don't airtight cover it in tin foil, but you want to cover it in tin foil, leaving a little bit of a chance for air to get in and out. And you want to let it rest. You want to let those meat fibers that have been all tensed up while I was on the grill unclench for maximum deliciousness and tenderness when you do cut it up and serve it. And whether you are cutting it into slices, whether you are cutting it into, or whether you're sort of shredding it for a pulled pork situation, whatever the case may be, you want to let it rest for, I'd say, about 10 to 15 minutes before you actually go to town on it. But that's it. Secret to barbecue is it's way, way easier than you think. Now, I actually have another podcast that I do with my good friend Ray Amico. Ray was my very first tour manager when I first started off in a band. Since then, I went into radio, and he became one of the biggest and most successful tour managers going. He's worked with everyone from System of a Down to Beastie Boys to various comedians. I think he was out on the road with Dane Cook not so long ago. He's worked with Kesha. He's worked with pretty much everyone. He's worked with the Rolling Stones. But that guy really, really, really knows how to cook. And Ray and I have a podcast where we talk about all the things that we talk about when we're on the phone with each other, which is music, barbecue, and baseball. Mostly our beloved yet perpetually heartbreaking New York Mets. But we have another podcast called Bands, BBQ and Baseball. I know a little something about barbecue. Like I said, I'm an enthusiastic novice. Ray knows exactly what he's talking about, not just with barbecue. He really kind of sharpened his barbecue skills during his time living in Nashville. But he knows how to cook. He is half Italian and spent a good chunk of his life living in Rome, in Italy, when he was the production manager for this band called Dream Theater, who did a lot of their biggest and best work in Europe. So he was basing himself in Rome, and he learned how to he learned how to cook from people in Rome. So this is a guy that makes handmade pasta. This is a guy that really knows exactly what he's doing, no matter what the kitchen is. No matter what's going on in the kitchen. Yeah, this is a guy who takes pizza very, very seriously. So I do have another podcast called Bands, BBQ and Baseball that I do with my great friend Ray Amico. And there's some talk about music on there. There's some talk about baseball on there. And at the end of every podcast, we talk about what we made that weekend, what we're cooking. And we share our recipe ideas. So if you want to hear more about barbecue, I would love to share that with you. And Ray and I do that in our other podcast. Anyways, maybe this will affect your culinary plans for the weekend. Thank you so much for hanging. Thank you for being a part of my radio family. As always, this time that you and I spend together, it's the best part of my day. I'll be back soon. We'll do it all over again. Later.